The static crackled through the speakers of Coast Guard Station Miami at 11:42 p.m. on March 15, 2023. The voice that cut through belonged to Captain Michael Rodriguez, a man with 22 years of maritime experience, commanding a 70-foot cargo vessel called the Stellar Dawn. His words came fast, tight with an emotion that veteran operators recognized immediately as controlled panic. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Stellar Dawn. All electronics are down. GPS is gone, compass spinning. We have no navigation, no engine control. Everything is... Then silence. Not the silence of a radio being switched off, but something deeper, something absolute. The kind of silence that feels like erasure. The Coast Guard launched a full search operation within 20 minutes. They found nothing. No debris field, no oil slick, no emergency beacon signal. Stellar Dawn had vanished as completely as ships did in the age before radar, before satellites, before we convinced ourselves that technology had made the ocean conquerable. This is not a story from the Bermuda Triangle's notorious past. This happened 14 months ago, and Captain Rodriguez's vessel was not alone. We tell ourselves that the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle belong to another era, a time when navigation was primitive and understanding of weather patterns was limited. We believe that modern technology has domesticated these waters, that GPS satellites and advanced meteorological systems have stripped away the unknown. We are wrong. Something has shifted in the last 20 years. The disappearances are not relics of maritime history. They are accelerating. In 2023 alone, 17 vessels reported catastrophic equipment failures while crossing the region bounded by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. 14 made it to port, their captains shaken, their instruments permanently damaged. 3 did not. This documentary explores what is happening in these waters now, today, in an age when we believed we had conquered the sea with silicon and steel. September 30th, 2015 began as an unremarkable day for the crew of the SS El Faro. The massive cargo ship, stretching 790 feet from bow to stern, sat loaded with containers at the port of Jacksonville, Florida, preparing for what should have been a routine voyage to San Juan, Puerto Rico. Captain Michael Davidson commanded a vessel that represented the pinnacle of modern maritime technology. Built with redundant navigation systems, satellite communication arrays, and safety protocols that had been refined over decades of commercial shipping operations, the El Faro was considered among the most reliable cargo vessels plying the Caribbean trade routes. What the crew didn't know as they cast off that morning was that they were sailing toward an encounter that would baffle maritime investigators, challenge our understanding of modern technology, and add one more impossible chapter to the dark legacy of the Bermuda Triangle. The vessel carried 33 souls. Most were experienced merchant mariners who had made this crossing dozens, sometimes hundreds of times before. The ship's manifest listed automotive parts, industrial equipment, and general cargo. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. At least, that's what the initial communications suggested. Dr. Catherine Morrison, a marine technology specialist at the Naval Research Institute, has spent the past 8 years analyzing the technical aspects of the El Faro's final voyage. She speaks carefully when discussing the case, choosing each word with the precision of someone who understands that her professional reputation hangs on the edge of the inexplicable. The El Faro was equipped with 3 independent GPS systems, she explains, her voice carrying a mixture of frustration and genuine confusion. These weren't outdated units. We're talking about differential GPS with real-time kinematic positioning, accurate to within centimeters. The ship also carried traditional gyro compasses, magnetic compasses, and inertial navigation systems. It's a redundancy built upon redundancy. The failure cascade that occurred shouldn't just be unlikely. It should be impossible according to everything we understand about maritime electronics. The first indication that something was wrong came on the morning of October 1st, 2015, when the ship's routine position reports began showing minor inconsistencies. The officers on watch initially dismissed these as software glitches, the kind of temporary anomalies that occasionally pop up in any complex system. They reset the primary GPS unit. The readings stabilized. for about 40 minutes. Then the compass started spinning. Not drifting slowly, the way a malfunctioning compass might behave if it lost its gyroscopic stability. Spinning. Multiple crew members reported watching the ship's primary magnetic compass rotate through complete 360-degree revolutions, over and over, as if the vessel were caught in some invisible vortex. The backup compass behaved identically. The digital heading displays flickered through random numbers, never settling, never finding magnetic north. Second mate Danielle Randolph sent a text message to a colleague on another vessel at 9:47 that morning. The message was brief, almost casual in its tone, but the content was deeply unsettling. Compasses are going crazy. All of them. GPS is jumping around. Captain says it's the storm, but instruments say we're not in bad weather yet. This message contains a critical detail that investigators would later find impossible to explain. The ship's onboard weather instruments, sophisticated systems designed to measure barometric pressure, wind speed, sea state, and atmospheric conditions, were reporting moderate weather. Cloudy skies, mild seas, winds at 15 knots. Conditions that wouldn't concern any experienced captain. But the satellite weather data, received from NOAA and other meteorological services, showed Hurricane Joaquin intensifying south of their position. Two completely different versions of reality, depending on which instruments you trusted. Captain Davidson, according to the recovered data transmissions, made the decision to maintain course. He had navigated through dozens of tropical systems during his career. The discrepancy between his onboard instruments and the satellite data apparently convinced him that the ship was farther from the storm center than the forecasts suggested. This would prove to be a fatal miscalculation, but not for the reasons conventional maritime analysis would suggest. At 11:15, the ship's automated positioning system sent a standard waypoint confirmation to the company's fleet management center. The GPS coordinates placed the El Faro exactly where it should have been according to the planned route, making normal progress towards San Juan. 7 minutes later, the next automated transmission showed the ship's position as 340 miles to the southeast, deep in the Bahamas, hundreds of miles off course. This was followed 3 minutes after that by a position reading that placed the vessel back near its original coordinates. It's not just that the GPS was wrong, Dr. Morrison emphasizes, her frustration evident. The distances involved make it physically impossible. To actually travel 340 miles in 7 minutes, the ship would need to be moving at nearly 3,000 miles per hour. These weren't just instrument errors. The data suggests the ship was somehow simultaneously in multiple locations, or that space-time itself was behaving in ways that violate everything we know about physics. The text messages from crew members during this period paint a picture of growing alarm mixed with professional bewilderment. These were not people prone to panic. They were trained mariners dealing with what they initially perceived as a technical problem. Chief Mate Stephen Schultz sent a message to his wife at 11:32. Navigation systems are completely haywire. Captain is going to manual piloting. We're trying to figure out where we actually are. Where they actually were would become the central mystery of the entire incident. By early afternoon, the communications from the ship took on a darker tone. The crew had apparently been dealing with instrument failures for hours. Every system they relied on to understand their position, their heading, and their environment was providing contradictory or impossible information. The ship's radar showed phantom landmasses that didn't exist on any chart. The depth sounder reported wildly fluctuating readings, showing ocean floor depths that alternated between 300 feet and over 15,000 feet, despite the ship maintaining what should have been a relatively straight course over gradually deepening water. At 2:18 in the afternoon, third mate Jeremy Ream made a satellite phone call to the company's operations center. The audio quality was poor, degraded by what investigators later described as unusual electromagnetic interference. In the fragments that were recoverable, Ream can be heard saying, "We can't trust any of our instruments. The autopilot keeps trying to turn us toward. We've disengaged it. Everything is manual now." The pause in that transmission, that moment where Ream stopped himself from completing the sentence, has been the subject of intense speculation. Toward what was the autopilot trying to turn them? The black box data, when it was eventually recovered, would provide a partial answer that has never been publicly released in full. What is known is that at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, the El Faro deviated sharply from its intended course. Despite the autopilot being disengaged, despite the ship being under direct manual control, the vessel turned almost 90 degrees to port and began steaming directly toward coordinates that would place it in the heart of the Bermuda Triangle's most historically active zone. Multiple crew members sent text messages noting this course change and expressing confusion about the decision. "We're heading straight into the storm," read a message from able seaman Jack Jackson. "Don't know why. Captain hasn't explained. Nil, tell well." But according to the bridge voice recorder data that was later partially transcribed, Captain Davidson was as confused as his crew. In exchanges with his officers, he repeatedly insisted they were maintaining their planned course to San Juan, even as everyone could see the compass headings showed something completely different. It was as if the captain was perceiving a different reality than the rest of the crew. The final text message from the El Faro was sent at 7:24 that evening. It came from an unknown crew member using the ship's general satellite communication system. The message consisted of only 9 words, but those words have haunted investigators ever since. "Instruments all dead now. We can see it. God help us." What did they see? The question hangs over the entire investigation like a shroud. The ship was officially declared missing on October 2nd, after it failed to arrive in San Juan and stopped responding to all hails. The Coast Guard launched an extensive search operation, deploying aircraft and vessels to scour thousands of square miles of ocean. On October 4th, a debris field was located northeast of the Bahamas. Life rings, cargo containers, fragments of fiberglass and metal, all bearing the markings of the El Faro. No survivors were found. The depth at the wreck site posed significant challenges. The ship had gone down in over 15,000 feet of water, resting on the ocean floor in nearly complete darkness. It took months to organize a deep-sea recovery operation capable of reaching that depth. When underwater drones finally located the main wreckage in November of 2015, they found the ship remarkably intact, sitting upright on the seafloor as if it had been carefully placed rather than sinking in violent weather. The black box, the voyage data recorder that should have contained definitive answers about what happened in those final hours, was recovered in August of 2016. This device records bridge conversations, engine room data, navigation inputs, and instrument readings. Its analysis should have resolved every question about the sinking. Instead, it deepened the mystery. The National Transportation Safety Board released a report in December of 2017, concluding that the ship sank due to the captain's decision to sail too close to Hurricane Joaquin, resulting in flooding and loss of propulsion. It was a tidy explanation that satisfied the requirements of maritime law and insurance claims. But the full black box data, the complete transcripts and instrument recordings, have never been made public. Portions remain classified or heavily redacted, cited as too technically complex for general release or containing proprietary navigation system information. Dr. Morrison was part of the technical team that reviewed the black box data. She speaks carefully about what she's allowed to discuss. The instrument readings we recovered from the data recorder don't correspond to any known weather phenomenon or technical failure mode. The magnetic field measurements show fluctuations that would require equipment malfunction on a scale that affects dozens of independent systems simultaneously. The GPS data shows those same impossible position jumps I mentioned earlier, but the black box confirms they weren't just transmission errors. The ship's own navigation computer was recording those locations as real. And the compass data. She pauses, choosing her words carefully. The compass data suggests the ship was experiencing magnetic fields that shouldn't exist at those coordinates. Fields that were rotating and pulsing in patterns that looked almost deliberately engineered. Almost deliberately engineered. The implication hangs in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. The families of the 33 crew members have repeatedly demanded the release of the complete black box data. Freedom of information requests have been filed and denied. Some family members have hired private maritime lawyers who specialize in shipping disasters. All have been stonewalled with technical jargon and claims of ongoing investigation, even though the official report has been closed for years. What could be in that data that requires such intense secrecy? The answer, according to several investigators who have spoken anonymously, is that the data simply doesn't make sense within our current understanding of physics and navigation technology. It shows a vessel that was simultaneously experiencing multiple contradictory realities, instruments that recorded conditions that are theoretically impossible, and course changes that occurred despite all steering systems, showing they were locked in position. The El Faro wasn't an ancient vessel with outdated equipment. This was modern technology, redundant systems, satellite communications, and trained professionals. If it can happen to a ship like this, equipped with every safety measure and technological advantage that 21st century maritime engineering can provide, then our assumptions about control and safety at sea are fundamentally flawed. Or something in the Bermuda Triangle remains that we have not yet identified. Something that can override our most advanced technology and pull vessels toward destinations they never intended to reach. Something that 33 experienced mariners saw in their final moments. Something terrible enough to inspire that last desperate message. We can see it. Whatever it was, the official maritime establishment has decided we're not ready to know. The morning of March 14, 2017, began like any other routine charter flight from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Miami, Florida. Captain Thomas Reardon had flown this route hundreds of times over his 22-year career, and nothing about the pre-flight checks suggested anything unusual was about to happen. 13 passengers boarded the twin-engine Beechcraft King Air, most of them business travelers making the relatively short hop across the Caribbean. The weather forecast showed clear skies with excellent visibility. By 9:45 in the morning, the aircraft was airborne, climbing to its cruising altitude of 18,000 feet. What happened next would become one of the most thoroughly documented and deeply perplexing incidents ever recorded in the Bermuda Triangle's long history of unexplained phenomena. At exactly 10:21 a.m., the aircraft vanished from air traffic control radar. Not gradually, not with any warning or distress signal, but instantaneously. One moment the plane was exactly where it should be, its transponder signal bright and clear on the screens in Miami. The next moment, nothing. Complete and total absence. The air traffic controller on duty, Maria Sanchez, would later testify that she immediately assumed equipment failure. She checked her systems, switched to backup radar, and contacted neighboring facilities. All confirmed the same impossible thing. The aircraft had simply ceased to exist on their instruments. For 47 agonizing minutes, Flight Echo Charlie 374 remained invisible to every radar system along the southeastern coast of the United States. The Coast Guard was alerted. Emergency protocols kicked into motion. Search and rescue teams prepared to deploy. And then, at 11:08 a.m., the plane reappeared on radar exactly where it should have been had it maintained its original course and speed the entire time. It was approaching Miami International Airport on the correct heading, at the correct altitude, as if nothing whatsoever had happened. The tower immediately contacted Captain Reardon. His voice came through calm and professional, requesting landing clearance. When asked if he had experienced any difficulties, any equipment malfunctions, any problems at all, his answer stopped everyone cold. He reported a completely normal flight. No issues, no turbulence, no concerns. He seemed genuinely confused by the question. Miami Approach Control informed him that his aircraft had been missing from radar for nearly an hour. There was a long pause before Reardon responded. He insisted that was impossible. According to his instruments, according to his flight plan, according to every measure he had available, the flight had proceeded exactly as scheduled. The plane landed safely at 11:32 a.m. The moment it taxied to the gate, it was surrounded by federal aviation officials, air safety investigators, and security personnel. The passengers were confused by the reception committee waiting for them. They deplaned expecting to collect their luggage and head to their meetings. Instead, they were escorted to a private area and questioned extensively. Every single one of them told the same story. The flight had been unremarkable. Smooth air, no delays, nothing out of the ordinary. Some had been working on laptops. Others had dozed. 2 had been reading. One woman had been reviewing a business presentation scheduled for that afternoon. Not one of them reported experiencing anything unusual. But here is where the incident shifts from merely strange to genuinely disturbing. Every timepiece on that aircraft told a different story than the passengers remembered. Watches, smartphones, tablets, the aircraft's chronometer, even a passenger's fitness tracker that recorded timestamps. All of them showed 47 minutes that the passengers could not account for. The business presentation the woman had been reviewing showed a last modified timestamp that placed her work during the missing time. Yet she had no memory of those minutes. A man who had been texting his wife showed sent messages time-stamped during the vanished period, messages he did not remember typing. The devices remembered what human minds apparently could not. Captain Reardon's testimony became the focal point of the investigation. He was interviewed separately, extensively, and repeatedly. His account never wavered in its essential details, though clearly the experience had shaken him deeply. He described proceeding normally through the flight until approximately 40 minutes after takeoff. That would place the event right around the time the plane disappeared from radar. He noticed what appeared to be a fog bank ahead, which struck him as unusual given the clear weather forecast. As the aircraft entered this fog, he immediately recognized that something was profoundly wrong with it. The fog itself was unlike anything he had encountered in over 2 decades of flying. It was not uniformly gray or white as normal clouds appear. Instead, Reardon described it as having structure within it, patterns that seemed almost mathematical or geometric in nature. He used words like crystalline, tessellated, and angular to describe formations within the mist that he insisted could not be natural. The patterns seemed to shift and rotate, creating the impression of depth and dimension that made his eyes hurt to focus on. He said it was like looking at one of those optical illusions where your brain cannot quite decide which interpretation is correct, except 3-dimensional and all around the aircraft. His instrument panel went haywire the moment they entered this strange fog. The altimeter spun through readings that would place them simultaneously at sea level and at 40,000 feet. The compass rotated continuously, unable to find magnetic north. The airspeed indicator flickered between 0 and readings that exceeded the aircraft's maximum possible velocity. The GPS system displayed coordinates that placed them over the Pacific Ocean, then over Central Africa, then showed error messages in formats Reardon had never seen before. His radio filled with static and what he described as a low humming sound that seemed to pulse in regular intervals. Every electronic system on the aircraft appeared to be receiving information from somewhere else, from some other reality that did not match the one the plane was physically occupying. But here is the crucial detail that likely saved everyone aboard. The manual flight controls remained perfectly responsive. The yoke, the rudder pedals, the throttles, all the physical mechanical linkages between pilot and aircraft functioned exactly as they should. Reardon relied entirely on his training and his physical senses. He maintained what he believed to be straight and level flight based purely on the feel of the aircraft and the view out his windscreen, even though that view showed only the swirling geometric fog. He said it felt like an eternity, though he estimated it as perhaps 5 or 6 minutes, before the aircraft suddenly emerged from the fog into clear air. The instant they exited that impossible mist, all instruments immediately returned to normal readings. Everything synchronized. Everything made sense again. The only problem was that none of the instruments acknowledged that anything unusual had just occurred. The flight data recorder, the so-called black box, should have resolved the mystery. Instead, it deepened the puzzle exponentially. Aviation safety investigators extracted the data and began their analysis expecting to find evidence of equipment failure or electromagnetic interference. What they found defied their understanding of how reality itself operates. During a 6-minute window that corresponded with the middle of the missing 47 minutes, the flight data recorder shows the aircraft in 2 separate locations simultaneously, not alternating between positions, not flickering from one place to another. The data clearly and consistently places the airplane in 2 different sets of coordinates at the same moment in time, as if the plane had somehow split or existed in superposition. One set of coordinates matches the expected flight path from San Juan to Miami that day. The other set places the aircraft nearly 300 miles to the southeast, over empty ocean in one of the deepest parts of the Caribbean Sea. Both position readings show identical altitude, airspeed, and heading. Both show the same pilot control inputs. Both are recorded with the same timestamps, down to the millisecond. Multiple independent experts examined this data. None could explain it as a malfunction or data corruption. The information was simply impossible, yet there it was, clear and undeniable. The investigation might have concluded as just another unexplained anomaly, filed away in the growing collection of Bermuda Triangle mysteries, except for what happened 6 months later. 3 of the 13 passengers, people who had not known each other before the flight and had no contact with each other afterward, each independently sought medical attention for identical symptoms. They reported persistent headaches localized to the left temple, episodes of time disorientation where they would lose track of several minutes, and vivid dreams featuring geometric patterns similar to what Captain Reardon had described in the fog. The medical evaluations found something even more disturbing. Each of the 3 patients showed identical anomalies in their brain scans, unusual clusters of activity in the temporal lobe that neurologists could not readily explain. These were not tumors or lesions, but rather patterns of neural activation that appeared almost coordinated, almost deliberate. The 3 patients were brought together for comparison studies. When they described their dream experiences to each other, they realized they had been having remarkably similar visions, crystalline structures, rotating geometries, a sense of being observed or measured by something vast and incomprehensible. One of these 3 passengers was a software engineer named David Callinger, 41 years old, married with 2 children. He became increasingly obsessed with understanding what had happened during those missing 47 minutes. He reached out to the other passengers, to Captain Reardon, to investigators. He filled notebooks with sketches of the geometric patterns from his dreams, trying to find mathematical relationships within them. His wife reported that he had become withdrawn and fixated, spending hours staring at his drawings, claiming he was close to understanding something important. On October 9, 2017, David Callinger left his home in Fort Lauderdale, telling his wife he was going to the office. He never arrived. His car was found 3 days later in a shopping center parking lot near the coast, keys in the ignition, wallet and phone on the passenger seat. Security footage showed him parking the vehicle, sitting motionless for approximately 11 minutes, then exiting the car and walking toward the ocean. He was never seen again. Despite extensive searches, no trace of him has ever been found. The other 2 passengers who developed the mysterious symptoms both reported that their conditions gradually faded over the following year. The headaches diminished. The time disorientation episodes became less frequent. The dreams eventually stopped. But both admitted in follow-up interviews that they still sometimes catch themselves drawing geometric patterns without conscious intention, their hands moving almost automatically to sketch tessellations and angular forms that feel somehow familiar yet utterly alien. Captain Reardon retired from commercial aviation shortly after the incident. He now lives in a small town in Colorado, as far from the ocean as he could manage. He granted one final interview 2 years after the event, and his closing statement has become chillingly famous among those who study these phenomena. He said that during those minutes in the geometric fog, he had the overwhelming sensation that the aircraft had passed through something, or that something had passed through them. Not a place, he insisted, but a moment where the usual rules temporarily did not apply. He said he remains grateful that he and his passengers emerged intact, but he has never stopped wondering if they truly came back exactly as they went in, or if something subtle and fundamental was changed in ways too small to measure, but too significant to ignore. In the spring of 2019, the research vessel Petrel departed from its port in Miami with a mission that seemed routine enough. Armed with the latest generation of autonomous underwater sonar mapping technology, the team of marine geologists had been contracted to chart previously unmapped sections of the seafloor in what mariners have long called the Bermuda Triangle. What they discovered, 15 nautical miles northeast of Bimini, would fundamentally challenge their understanding of deep ocean geology and spark a controversy that continues to reverberate through the scientific community to this day. The anomaly first appeared on their screens during the 3rd day of mapping. Lead sonar technician Marcus Chen would later describe the moment as watching something impossible materialize from the noise. The formation registered as a geometric shape on the ocean floor, roughly circular in outline, but divided into segments that displayed a degree of symmetry that natural geological processes simply do not produce. The structure measured approximately 2,300 feet in diameter, resting at a depth of 2,400 feet beneath the surface. But it was not the size that made Chen immediately call over the expedition's chief geologist, Dr. Sarah Vickers. It was the readings themselves. The magnetic signature emanating from the formation was unlike anything in Dr. Vickers' 22 years of oceanographic research. Standard underwater geological features might show magnetic properties, certainly. Volcanic rock, iron deposits, even certain types of sedimentary layers can produce measurable electromagnetic fields. But this was different. The magnetometer readings were spiking in ways that seemed to follow a pattern, fluctuating in intensity at regular intervals, climbing from background levels to peaks strong enough to interfere with the ship's own navigational instruments when they passed directly overhead. Dr. Vickers ordered the team to conduct multiple passes over the site, mapping it from different angles, verifying that what they were seeing was not some kind of equipment malfunction or interference from an unknown source. Each pass confirmed the same impossible geometry. The formation appeared to be divided into 12 symmetrical sections, radiating from a central point. The edges between these sections registered as unnaturally straight, deviating less than 0.3% across distances of hundreds of feet. Natural rock formations do not behave this way. Erosion, tectonic movement, sediment deposition, all the forces that shape the ocean floor create irregular, organic patterns. This looked designed. The electromagnetic readings became even stranger when the team began continuous monitoring over a 72-hour period. The magnetic field did not remain constant. It pulsed. The pattern repeated every 11 hours and 17 minutes, building from a baseline reading to a peak that registered at nearly 8,000 nanotels, roughly 16 times stronger than Earth's natural magnetic field at sea level. During these peaks, compass readings aboard the Petrel became unreliable. Electronic equipment experienced minor glitches. On 2 occasions, their satellite communication system temporarily lost signal. Dr. Vickers, a cautious scientist by nature and training, began the painstaking process of ruling out conventional explanations. Could this be a previously unknown iron deposit? Unlikely, given the symmetry and the pulsing nature of the field. Could it be some kind of volcanic formation? The surrounding geology showed no evidence of volcanic activity in millions of years. Could it be man-made debris, perhaps a sunken ship with a cargo of magnetized materials? The sheer size and the geometric precision argued against it. She authorized the deployment of a remote-operated vehicle, equipped with cameras and a full suite of geological sampling instruments. The ROV descended through the darkness, its lights eventually illuminating the seafloor below. The video feed showed something that made everyone in the control room fall silent. The formation was not covered in sediment, as would be expected for anything that had been on the ocean floor for any significant length of time. Instead, its surface appeared almost clean, dark and metallic in appearance, with the geometric divisions clearly visible as raised ridges, approximately 2 feet in height. The ROV's sampling arm managed to scrape a small amount of material from one of these ridges before the vehicle's systems began to malfunction. The electromagnetic interference at that depth and proximity was overwhelming the ROV's electronics. They brought it back to the surface before losing it entirely, but they had their sample. Analysis of that sample would become the catalyst for everything that followed. Dr. Vickers sent portions to 3 separate laboratories for independent verification. The results, when they came back, were consistent and deeply puzzling. The material was metallic, but its composition did not match any standard alloy or any natural metal formation known to terrestrial geology. It contained high concentrations of titanium and an unknown element that mass spectrometry suggested had an atomic weight that did not correspond to any element on the periodic table. More precisely, the isotope ratios were wrong, as if the material had formed under physical conditions that do not exist on Earth. Dr. Vickers did what any responsible scientist would do. She documented her findings meticulously and prepared to present them to her colleagues and the funding agency that had sponsored the expedition. But she also did something that would effectively end her involvement in the project. She suggested in a preliminary report that the formation might not be natural in origin. The response was swift and severe. Within a week of submitting her report, Dr. Vickers was informed that her services were no longer required on the project. The official explanation cited budget constraints and a restructuring of research priorities. But Dr. Vickers knew the academic world well enough to recognize a quiet removal when she experienced one. She was offered a generous settlement package contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement regarding her findings. She refused. In a decision that would make her a pariah in some circles and a hero in others, Dr. Vickers went public. She gave interviews to scientific journals and mainstream media outlets, presenting her data and her concerns. She showed the sonar images, the magnetic field readings, and the laboratory analysis of the sample. She carefully avoided speculation about what the formation might be, focusing instead on what it was not. It was not a natural geological feature. It was not consistent with any known terrestrial material. And it was producing electromagnetic effects that appeared to follow a deliberate pattern. Her revelations sparked intense interest and equally intense skepticism. Other researchers began examining the data she had released, and while some dismissed her conclusions as premature or sensationalized, others found her evidence compelling. A small group of independent investigators began compiling historical data on maritime incidents in the Bermuda Triangle, cross-referencing disappearance dates with the magnetic pulse pattern that Dr. Vickers had documented. What they found was unsettling. While not every incident correlated, there appeared to be a statistically significant cluster of disappearances and equipment malfunctions that aligned with the predicted peaks in the magnetic cycle. Ships reporting compass failures, aircraft experiencing electrical problems, vessels simply vanishing without distress calls. The dates matched more often than random chance would suggest. This correlation raised profound and disturbing questions. If the magnetic anomaly had been pulsing in this pattern for decades, could it have been contributing to navigational failures? Could intense electromagnetic fields at peak strength disable electronics or interfere with instruments in ways that left crews disoriented or unable to call for help? The theory was speculative, but it was testable if only the scientific community could gain access to the site for further study. But access was precisely what became impossible to obtain. In the months following Dr. Vickers' public disclosure, at least 4 separate research expeditions attempted to secure permits to study the anomaly. All were denied, often with vague citations of maritime safety concerns or overlapping territorial claims. An independent oceanographic institute tried to mount an expedition without official permits, only to find their vessel turned back by Coast Guard cutters citing restricted waters. The most troubling incident occurred in late 2020. A well-funded private expedition managed to reach the site and deployed an advanced unmanned submarine equipped with high-definition cameras and electromagnetic sensors. The submarine, which had cost nearly $3 million and represented the cutting edge of deep-sea exploration technology, descended toward the formation while transmitting live data back to the surface vessel. At 2,400 feet, exactly at the depth where the formation rested, the transmission simply stopped. Not gradually, not with warning signs of system failure, but instantaneously. One moment the submarine was sending clear video and telemetry. The next moment, nothing. The surface team attempted every recovery protocol in their manual. They sent acoustic signals to trigger the emergency ballast release that should bring the submarine back to the surface. No response. They deployed a second smaller ROV to search for it. That ROV's tether was found severed at a depth of 1,900 feet, the ROV itself gone. The submarine was never recovered. Neither were the data it had been collecting in those final moments. Whatever it saw or recorded as it approached the anomaly is lost, somewhere in the darkness 2,400 feet below the surface, resting perhaps on the formation itself. Dr. Sarah Vickers now teaches geology at a small college in Oregon, far from the oceanographic institutes where she once worked. She still receives emails from researchers, from journalists, from people who believe the anomaly represents something extraordinary. She answers what questions she can, always carefully, always aware that her academic reputation remains damaged by her decision to speak publicly about findings that challenged conventional understanding. In interviews, she is asked what she believes the formation might be. She always gives the same answer. She does not know. She only knows what it is not. It is not a natural feature shaped by known geological processes. It is not made of materials that match Earth's standard composition. And it is not something that can be easily explained or dismissed. The anomaly remains where it was discovered, 2,400 feet beneath the waves, pulsing with electromagnetic energy in its 11-hour and 17-minute cycle, its impossible geometry unchanged, its origins unknown. Ships still pass overhead, their instruments still occasionally faltering when the magnetic field reaches its peak. And somewhere in the filing cabinets of government agencies and research institutions, reports about the formation gather dust, classified or ignored, waiting for a time when perhaps humanity will be ready to confront what rests in the deep waters of the Bermuda Triangle. On the morning of September 17, 2020, a commercial fishing vessel operating 40 nautical miles east of the Bermuda Triangle's traditional boundary spotted something that didn't belong in those waters. The yacht Persephone drifted without power, sails furled, moving with the current like a ghost ship from another century. When the fishing crew hailed the vessel over radio, they received no response. Through binoculars, they could see people on deck, sitting motionless, staring straight ahead. The Coast Guard arrived within 2 hours. What they found would become one of the most disturbing maritime incidents in modern history, one that would challenge our understanding of neuroscience, oceanography, and the very nature of shared human experience. All 5 crew members were alive. Their hearts beat steadily. They breathed without difficulty, but they were somewhere else entirely, trapped in a waking dream state that medical personnel had never encountered before. Their eyes remained open, tracking movement occasionally, but showing no recognition, no understanding, no connection to the world around them. It was as if their consciousness had been scooped out, leaving only the biological machinery still running. The crew consisted of experienced sailors. Captain Marcus Holloway, 52 years old, had crossed the Atlantic 17 times. His wife, Jennifer, served as first mate and navigator, with over 30 years of sailing experience between them. The remaining crew included 2 professional yacht handlers, David Chen and Rebecca Morrison, both in their 30s with impeccable safety records, and a marine biologist named Dr. Thomas Waverly, who had joined them to study migratory patterns of deep-sea species. These were not inexperienced weekend sailors who might panic in unusual conditions. These were professionals who had weathered storms, navigated equipment failures, and handled emergencies at sea. Yet something had reduced all 5 of them to a catatonic state that appeared identical in each person. The Coast Guard transported them to a medical facility in Miami, where neurologists, psychiatrists, and trauma specialists began the painstaking process of evaluation. The initial scans revealed something that made the medical team request immediate consultations with specialists from Johns Hopkins and the National Institutes of Health. All 5 crew members showed identical abnormalities in their brain activity patterns. The regions associated with memory processing, visual interpretation, and temporal awareness all displayed the same unusual electrical signatures. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead neurologist on the case, described it in her report as seeing 5 separate brains that had been tuned to the same frequency, as if they had all experienced something so overwhelming and so synchronized that it had physically altered their neural pathways in exactly the same way. This wasn't simply 5 people who had been traumatized. This was 5 people whose brains now bore identical scars, identical patterns of disruption. In her 28 years of practice, Dr. Chen had never seen anything like it. Traumatic events affect each brain differently, creating unique patterns based on individual psychology, previous experiences, and personal resilience. But these 5 brains looked as though they had been processed through the same extraordinary event that ignored all individual differences. For 6 days, the crew remained in their catatonic state. They required feeding tubes and constant monitoring. Their vital signs remained stable, but they showed no awareness of their surroundings, no response to familiar voices or faces, no indication that anyone was home behind those open, staring eyes. Then, on the 7th day, Captain Holloway blinked. It was a normal blink, not the slow, mechanical blinking that had continued during his catatonic state. A nurse noticed and immediately called for the medical team. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus Holloway slowly returned to consciousness, like someone surfacing from an impossibly deep dive. His first words were, "Did you see them too?" The video testimony that Marcus Holloway provided over the following weeks would become one of the most analyzed documents in modern maritime history. Neurologists, oceanographers, military analysts, and psychologists have studied every word, every pause, every involuntary reaction as he described what happened during those 18 hours before the fishing vessel found them. According to Holloway's account, the Persephone had been making excellent time on the return leg of a routine voyage from the British Virgin Islands to Charleston, South Carolina. The weather was perfect, winds steady at 12 knots, visibility unlimited under a clear sky. They were running on autopilot, all systems functioning normally, crew in good spirit. The first indication that something was wrong came around 11:30 at night, when Rebecca Morrison, who had the watch, called everyone on deck. She didn't sound panicked, Holloway recalled, but there was something in her voice that made everyone respond immediately. The ocean was glowing, not with bioluminescence, which all of them had seen countless times before. This was different. Beneath the hull, perhaps 60 to 80 feet down, lights were moving. Holloway described them as geometric patterns, precise and deliberate, creating shapes that hurt to look at because they seemed to suggest dimensions that his eyes couldn't quite process. Triangles that somehow had more than 3 sides. Circles that bent in ways that defied geometry. The lights were bright enough to illuminate the water around the yacht, turning the black ocean into something translucent and strange. And they were moving, traveling beneath the boat in formations that suggested intelligence and purpose. Dr. Waverly, the marine biologist, immediately began trying to document what they were seeing. He suggested it might be some unknown species of deep-sea creature, perhaps squid with unusual bioluminescent capabilities. But as they watched, that explanation fell apart. The lights were too organized, too geometric, too clearly structured to be biological. They moved in perfect synchronization, creating patterns that changed and evolved but maintained an internal logic. Holloway said it was like watching a language being written in light beneath them, a language that his mind almost understood but couldn't quite grasp. Then the shapes began to rise. Massive forms, illuminated from within, ascending through the water column directly toward the yacht. Holloway estimated they were enormous, perhaps the size of commercial aircraft, though judging scale underwater at night proved impossible. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed wrong for objects of such apparent size and solidity. The crew stood frozen at the rail, watching these impossible things rise toward them. David Chen activated the yacht's onboard cameras, trying to capture video, while Jennifer Holloway attempted to raise the Coast Guard on radio. Neither action produced results. Every electrical system on the Persephone failed simultaneously. The autopilot disengaged. The GPS went dark. The radio died. Even the battery-powered emergency equipment refused to function. They were left in complete silence, except for the sound of water against the hull and their own increasingly panicked breathing. But they could still see, because the ocean itself had become luminous. The water was glowing, not from the lights below anymore, but from within, as if every molecule had become a tiny lamp. Holloway described it as sailing through liquid light, through an ocean that had transformed into something else entirely. And the water itself had changed. It had become thick, viscous, offering resistance to any movement. When Holloway tried to lower a hand toward the surface, it felt like pushing through gel, through something that had density and weight beyond normal seawater. The temperature had changed too. The air, which had been comfortable moments before, became oppressively hot and humid. Sweat poured down their faces. Their clothes became soaked. The yacht's wooden deck felt warm beneath their feet. All 5 crew members reported seeing the massive shapes pass directly beneath the hull, close enough that they should have collided with the yacht. But there was no impact, no disturbance. The shapes moved through the water, or perhaps through space itself, without displacing anything. Then came the hallucinations, though Holloway insisted they weren't hallucinations but shared experiences. All 5 crew members saw the same things simultaneously, and described them identically later. They saw vast underwater structures extending down into depths that shouldn't exist in those waters. Geometric complexes of light and shadow. Buildings that couldn't be buildings because buildings don't exist 3 miles underwater, yet there they were. They saw corridors of light extending horizontally through the ocean, as if someone had carved tunnels through the water itself. They saw symbols and patterns written in the luminescence, configurations that seemed meaningful but remained just beyond comprehension. And then, according to Holloway, they saw something looking back. Not with eyes, but with attention. Something massive and ancient and utterly alien became aware of them. In that moment of recognition, Holloway said, his mind simply stopped. It was like his consciousness hit a wall that it couldn't process, couldn't integrate, couldn't survive intact. His last memory before waking in the hospital was a sensation of falling upward, of the yacht ascending through water that had become something other than water, while geometric shapes of light surrounded them in patterns that his mind kept trying to understand until understanding itself broke down. The other 4 crew members never fully recovered. Jennifer Holloway, David Chen, Rebecca Morrison, and Dr. Thomas Waverly remain in long-term care facilities, conscious but disconnected, able to perform basic functions, but showing no emotional range, no personality, no sense of self. They are alive but not present, permanently changed by whatever they experienced during those 18 hours. The investigation into the Persephone incident began immediately, driven by the extraordinary nature of the case and the identical brain anomalies found in all 5 crew members. The yacht itself provided more questions than answers. The vessel showed no damage, no signs of distress, no indication that anything unusual had occurred. The cameras that David Chen had activated were found to be completely empty of data, though they showed signs of having recorded something that had somehow been erased at a hardware level. The oceanographic team that investigated the GPS coordinates where the Persephone had drifted found conditions that made no scientific sense. The water temperature at the surface measured 89 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 degrees higher than it should have been for that location and season. More disturbing, the salinity levels were 40% lower than normal, as if massive amounts of fresh water had somehow been introduced into the ocean at that specific point. Deep water samples revealed thermal layers that violated every principle of oceanography. Cold water sat above warm water, dense layers floated atop less dense layers, creating an impossible structure that should have immediately corrected itself through natural mixing, but somehow remained stable. The ocean floor beneath that location sits at a depth of approximately 16,000 feet. Yet sonar readings produced confused and contradictory data, suggesting depths that varied wildly, sometimes showing structures rising thousands of feet above where the seafloor should be, other times showing voids that extended far deeper than the surrounding terrain. Then came the satellite data. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration retrieved thermal imaging from the night in question, standard surveillance data collected by weather satellites that continuously monitor ocean surface temperatures for climate research. The images showed a massive thermal anomaly at the exact coordinates where the Persephone had been drifting. A heat signature approximately 3 miles in diameter, rising from the ocean floor, warming the water column from the bottom up. The temperature differential was extreme enough to be visible from space, showing as a bright bloom of thermal energy in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Geologists confirmed there are no volcanic vents, no hydrothermal systems, no known geological features at that location that could produce such a signature. Marine biologists stated that no biological phenomenon could generate that much heat over such a large area. The signature appeared suddenly at approximately 11:27 post-meridian, lasted for 19 hours, then vanished just as abruptly, leaving water temperatures and salinity levels that took weeks to return to normal. The pattern of the heat signature, when analyzed in detail, showed structure. It wasn't a random bloom of thermal energy, but an organized pattern of heat distribution, with geometric variations in temperature that suggested design rather than natural occurrence. Multiple government agencies have classified much of the data from the Persephone incident. What remains available to researchers continues to generate more questions than answers. 5 experienced sailors shared an identical experience that physically altered their brains in the same way. The ocean itself changed properties in ways that violate physics. Something massive and hot rose from the deep ocean floor, remained present for nearly a day, then disappeared. Captain Marcus Holloway continues to undergo neurological evaluation and therapy. His brain activity patterns are slowly returning to normal, though he suffers from recurring nightmares of geometric lights and underwater structures. He refuses to go near the ocean now, and becomes physically ill if shown images of water. In his most recent video testimony, recorded 8 months after the incident, Holloway was asked what he believes happened during those 18 hours. His response has been analyzed by experts across multiple disciplines. "We saw something we weren't supposed to see," he said, his voice flat and tired. "Something that exists in the ocean, or beneath it, or maybe using the ocean as a doorway to somewhere else. It's still there. It's always been there. And it knows that we know. That's what keeps me awake at night. Not what we saw, but the fact that it saw us seeing it, and it chose to let me remember." Oh. The cruise ship Luminous Majesty departed Port Canaveral, Florida, on the night of March 17, 2021, carrying 3,400 passengers and a crew of 1,100. It was a vessel of breathtaking luxury, a floating city designed to make people forget they were at sea. By the time dawn broke 2 days later, every single person aboard would have been changed by what they witnessed, and a machinery of silence would descend that continues to operate even now. The ship's planned route took it through what mariners have long recognized as the northern edge of the Bermuda Triangle, a course that thousands of vessels navigate safely each year. The evening of March 18th began like any other night at sea. Passengers filled the restaurants and theaters. Children splashed in pools under artificial twilight. The casino hummed with the particular energy of people testing their luck against the house. By 11:45 that night, everything had changed. What happened next has been pieced together from leaked testimony, confiscated cell phone footage that managed to survive the cover-up, and interviews with passengers who refused to sign the non-disclosure agreements that would later be pressed upon them. The picture that emerges is one of the most disturbing maritime incidents in modern history, an event that should have dominated headlines worldwide, but instead vanished into a carefully constructed silence. The power failure struck without warning at 11:47. Not a gradual brownout, or the kind of brief interruption that occasionally affects even the most sophisticated vessels. Every electrical system on the Luminous Majesty died simultaneously and completely. The engines stopped. The lights extinguished. The emergency systems that should have activated within seconds remained dark. In an instant, 3,400 passengers were plunged into absolute darkness aboard a dead ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Jennifer Morales, a passenger from Austin, Texas, later described those first moments. She had been on the Lido deck with her husband when the lights failed. The screaming started almost immediately, she recalled, that particular kind of panic that erupts when people suddenly cannot see and do not understand why. She remembered reaching for her husband's hand in the darkness, remembered the way the crowd surged and pressed as people sought stability, sought walls and railings, sought anything solid in the sudden and complete black. Then, according to 17 separate testimonies that would later be compiled by independent investigators, the ocean began to glow. It started as a faint luminescence beneath the surface, a pale green radiance that grew stronger with each passing second. Within minutes, the water surrounding the Luminous Majesty had transformed into something that witnesses struggled to describe. Bioluminescent, some called it, like the natural phenomenon produced by certain plankton and jellyfish. But this was different in both scale and intensity. The glow extended in every direction as far as anyone could see, turning the night ocean into something alien and impossible. Marcus Chen, a marine biologist from Vancouver who happened to be aboard for his honeymoon, would later give detailed testimony about what he observed. He stressed in his leaked interview that natural bioluminescence occurs in pockets and patches, created by disturbances in the water or by organisms responding to threat. What surrounded the ship that night was uniform, constant, and far too bright to be explained by any known biological process. The entire ocean had become a pale green mirror, reflecting a light that came from beneath, from depths that should have been utterly dark. But the glowing water was only the beginning. As passengers crowded against the rails, their eyes adjusting to the eerie illumination, people began pointing at something in the water, something moving. Dozens of cell phones captured fragments of what happened next, though most of that footage would later be confiscated by company security working in coordination with federal agents who boarded the ship upon its return to port. The shape appeared first as a shadow against the luminous water, a darkness that seemed to contradict the glow surrounding it. It moved beneath the ship from bow to stern, and as it passed, witnesses reported a sense of scale that defied comprehension. This was not a whale or a submarine or any kind of known vessel. The shape was larger than the cruise ship itself, which measured 960 feet from end to end. Some passengers estimated the thing beneath them stretched twice that length. Others claimed it was even larger, that trying to see all of it at once was like trying to see an entire coastline while standing at water level. Deborah Price, a retired school teacher from Ohio, recorded a video on her phone that lasted 43 seconds before battery failure ended the recording. In it, her voice shakes as she narrates what she is seeing. "Something big under the ship," she says. "Something really big. Oh God. Oh my God, it is still going. Where is it going?" The footage shows other passengers silhouetted against the green glow, arms outstretched, pointing at the water. Someone in the background is crying. Someone else is praying aloud. Up on the bridge, Captain Gerald Morrison and his officers were experiencing their own nightmare. Morrison was a veteran of 32 years at sea, a man who had navigated hurricanes and equipment failures and every kind of maritime challenge. What he witnessed that night would drive him from the profession he loved. In an anonymous interview conducted 8 months after the incident, his voice heavily disguised, Morrison described watching his instruments show something that could not be real. The depth finder, he explained, measures the distance from the hull to the ocean floor using sonar pulses. In that region of the Atlantic, the depth should have registered approximately 18,000 feet. As the shape passed beneath the ship, Morrison watched his instruments show the depth changing to 400 feet. Not gradually, but in seconds. As if the ocean floor had suddenly risen more than 3 miles, or as if something impossibly massive had positioned itself directly beneath them. Then, as quickly as it had changed, the reading returned to 18,000 feet. The captain's voice in the interview breaks when he describes this. He states clearly that what the instruments showed was a physical impossibility, that there is no rational explanation for how water depth could change so drastically and so quickly. The power remained dead for 41 minutes. Passengers huddled together on the dark decks, watching the luminous ocean and the shadow that moved through it. Some reported seeing other shapes in the water, smaller but still enormous by any conventional standard. Multiple witnesses described a moment when the water around the ship seemed to rise, as if something beneath had pushed upward, lifting the ocean itself. The ship rolled gently with the swell, and that was when people began to feel it through the hull, a vibration that seemed to move through the metal, through their feet, into their bones. At 12:28, the power returned. The lights blazed back to life. The engines rumbled awake. The luminous majesty became once again a functioning vessel. And within seconds, the green luminescence in the water began to fade. Within 2 minutes, it was gone completely, leaving only normal darkness and the ship's reflected lights on the water. The shape, whatever it had been, was no longer visible. The ocean looked like ocean again, like nothing unusual had ever occurred. Captain Morrison immediately attempted to file an incident report and contact the Coast Guard. According to his later testimony, he was instructed by the company's operations center to maintain radio silence pending further instruction. Within an hour, corporate executives from Regal Oceanic Lines, the ship's operator, were on secure calls with the bridge. By dawn, a plan was in motion. When the luminous majesty docked in San Juan, Puerto Rico, 48 hours later, teams of company representatives boarded the ship. Passengers were informed there would be a delay in disembarkation due to necessary inspections. What followed was a coordinated effort to suppress what had happened. Passengers were approached individually and in family groups. They were offered full refunds, future cruise credits, and in some cases, substantial cash settlement. In exchange, they were asked to sign non-disclosure agreements that prohibited them from discussing the incident publicly or with media. Those who had taken photographs or videos on their phones were visited by company security and, in several documented cases, by federal agents who identified themselves as being from the Department of Homeland Security. The footage was deleted. Phones were confiscated for inspection. People were told that sharing information about the incident could compromise ongoing security investigations. Most passengers signed the agreements. The combination of financial incentive, official pressure, and the desire to simply leave the ship and return to normal life proved effective. But not everyone complied. 17 passengers refused the NDS and left the ship determined to tell their stories. Their testimonies would become the foundation of an independent investigation conducted by maritime safety advocates and journalists. Captain Morrison never commanded another vessel. He submitted his resignation 6 weeks after the incident, walking away from a career that had been his entire adult life. In his anonymous interview, he spoke about the impossibility of continuing to work for a company that would deny what happened, that would prioritize reputation over truth. He described being pressured to sign his own NDA, being told his pension could be affected by his cooperation or lack thereof. He signed eventually, but months later, disguised and speaking through voice alteration technology, he broke that silence. The human cost of the incident extended far beyond immediate fear. Dr. Patricia Lynn, a clinical psychologist who treated several passengers after the event, documented a disturbing pattern. 17 passengers, scattered across different parts of the ship during the incident, with no connection to one another and no opportunity to coordinate their stories, developed severe psychological trauma in the weeks following. They suffered from nightmares, panic attacks, and intrusive thoughts. When Dr. Lin interviewed them separately and compared notes, she discovered they were all reporting identical nightmares. Each described drowning in luminous green water, sinking deeper and deeper into a cold that burned, seeing shapes moving around them in the glowing depths. The consistency of these nightmares, across individuals who had never met and had not discussed their experiences with one another, suggested to Dr. Lin something beyond typical trauma response. It suggested a shared experience at a level deeper than conscious memory. Meanwhile, standard maritime protocol required hull inspection after any unusual incident. The Luminous Majesty was taken to a secured facility for examination. What inspectors found should have triggered immediate investigation by multiple agencies. Running along nearly the entire length of the keel, hundreds of feet of scrape marks scarred the metal. They were deep, measured in inches of displaced steel. The pattern suggested the ship had made contact with something beneath it, something that had scraped along the bottom of the hull. Metallurgical analysis of the scraped areas revealed an impossibility. The damage showed clear evidence of extreme cold. The scoring patterns and microscopic fracturing of the metal were consistent with contact from an object or surface with a temperature of -40 degrees Fahrenheit. But the Luminous Majesty had been sailing through tropical waters where the ocean temperature ranged from 75 to 80 degrees. There is no known marine animal, no submarine, no naturally occurring phenomenon that could be that cold in that environment. Even if a pocket of Arctic water had somehow, impossibly, existed in the tropical Atlantic, it could not have maintained such an extreme temperature differential. And no amount of cold water could explain the physical scrapping, the marks that indicated solid contact with something massive and incredibly cold moving against the ship's hull. The official report filed by Regal Oceanic Lines attributed the power failure to a cascade system malfunction, a rare but technically possible event. The glowing water was dismissed as bioluminescence from a large bloom of dinoflagellates. The witness reports of a massive shape were characterized as mass hysteria and misperception under stressful conditions. The depth finder anomalies were labeled as instrumentation error. The hull damage was noted, but attributed to possible contact with debris or previously uncharted obstruction. No mention was made of the temperature analysis. No explanation was offered for the identical nightmares. No acknowledgement was given to the impossibility of the official explanation, accounting for all the documented facts. 3 years have passed since that night, in March of 2021. The Luminous Majesty still sails under a different name, repainted and rebranded after Regal Oceanic Lines quietly sold it to another operator. Most of the passengers had moved on with their lives, bound by legal agreements, or simply by the desire to forget. But the 17 who refused to sign, who continued to speak despite legal threats and social dismissal, maintain that something real happened that night. Something immense and cold and inexplicable moved beneath their ship, in waters that should have been empty. And somewhere in corporate files and government databases, evidence of that impossibility remains, locked away from a public that might ask questions no one in authority wants to answer. On the morning of March 17, 2023, the oceanographic research vessel Mariana's Eye departed from Honolulu Harbor on what would become the most documented and disturbing disappearance in the history of maritime science. The vessel, a 240-foot research platform equipped with cutting-edge sensor arrays and deep-sea monitoring equipment, had one specific mission: to investigate the persistent anomalies reported within the western boundary of the Bermuda Triangle using technology that had never before been deployed in these waters. What made this expedition different from countless others was the sheer amount of scientific instrumentation aboard and the continuous data transmission systems that would, ironically, preserve the final hours of everyone on board in horrifying detail. The Mariana's Eye carried a crew of 47 souls, including some of the world's leading oceanographers, marine biologists, and acoustic specialists. The expedition leader, Dr. Patricia Valdez, had spent 15 years studying unexplained oceanic phenomena and had secured funding from multiple international scientific organizations to deploy what she called the most comprehensive sensor network ever assembled for anomaly research. The ship bristled with hydrophone arrays capable of detecting sounds across the entire acoustic spectrum, electromagnetic field sensors that could measure fluctuations down to the nanoteslA, and forward-looking sonar systems originally developed for submarine navigation. Every instrument aboard was connected to a central data collection system that continuously transmitted information to a series of oceanographic buoys deployed along their route. This redundancy in data recording, designed to ensure no information would be lost even in the event of catastrophic equipment failure, would ultimately provide the only window into what transpired during those final 6 hours. For the first 11 days of the expedition, the Mariana's Eye operated exactly as planned. The crew conducted systematic surveys of underwater topography, collected water samples at varying depths, and deployed dozens of sensors along the seafloor. Dr. Valdez maintained regular communication with research institutions, monitoring their progress, and her video logs reflected the professional optimism of a scientist seeing years of preparation finally coming to fruition. The ship's position placed them roughly 320 nautical miles northeast of Puerto Rico, directly within a region where dozens of vessels and aircraft had reported instrument malfunctions over the decades. What the crew didn't report, at least not in official channels, were the subtle irregularities that had begun appearing in their data streams starting on day 9 of the mission. The recovered data from the buoys tells a story that grows increasingly unsettling with each passing hour. Beginning at 1400 hours on March 27, hydrophone recordings picked up sounds emanating from the deep ocean trenches below the ship. At first, these sounds were cataloged as possible geological activity, the kind of low-frequency rumbling associated with tectonic movement or underwater volcanic processes. But as acoustic specialists from the Naval Research Laboratory would later testify, these sounds defied conventional categorization. The frequencies shifted in patterns that suggested structure, almost like language, but occurring at wavelengths that seemed to bypass normal physics. Some portions of the audio existed simultaneously across multiple frequency bands in ways that should have been impossible according to our understanding of acoustics. When enhanced and played back, the sounds created feelings of profound unease in listeners, a visceral reaction that several analysts attributed to infrasound effects, though that explanation failed to account for all the properties present in the recordings. By 1700 hours, Dr. Valdez made her first mention of visual anomalies in her video log DT. Standing on the aft deck with the late afternoon sun creating long shadows across the water, she pointed to the ocean surface surrounding the ship. The water had begun moving in subtle spiral patterns that contradicted the prevailing current and wind direction. Their oceanographic sensors showed the north equatorial current flowing exactly as predicted, yet the surface water within a radius of approximately 200 yards from the ship moved in a slow, clockwise rotation. Valdez's tone remained clinical and observational, but the footage captures something else in her expression, a tightness around her eyes that suggested she recognized this phenomenon meant something significant, something that excited and worried her in equal measure. The hydrophone recordings from 1800 hours onward become increasingly difficult for listeners to endure. Multiple acoustic experts who analyzed the data reported feeling physically ill when exposed to the sounds for extended periods. The audio contains what can only be described as resonances, deep vibrations that seem to come from the abyssal plane nearly 4 miles below the surface, yet carrying with clarity that should have been impossible at such depth. Interspersed with these resonances were shorter bursts of higher frequency sounds that bore unsettling similarities to biological vocalizations, though no known marine species produces anything comparable. Several researchers independently noted that certain segments, when played in sequence, created the impression of responsiveness, as if something deep below was answering the ship's sonar pings with increasing complexity. At 2100 hours, the Mariana's Eye's automated systems triggered an alert that would mark the beginning of the end. The ship's depth finders, which continuously mapped the ocean floor below, registered an impossibility. The abyssal plane, which had maintained a consistent depth of 6,100 meters throughout their survey, was rising. The sonar returns showed a solid surface ascending from the depths at a rate that made no geological sense. In the video log recorded at 21:13 hours, Dr. Valdez appeared in the control room, her voice strained but maintaining professional composure as she described what their instruments were showing. The solid mass rising beneath them measured at least 3 miles in diameter, ascending at a rate of approximately 200 meters per minute. At that speed, she calculated, it would reach the surface in less than 30 minutes. The crew immediately attempted to move the vessel out of the area, but here the recordings capture something that adds another layer of impossibility to the events. Despite the ship's engines running at full power, the Mariana's Eye remained virtually stationary. The spiral pattern in the water had intensified into a visible whirlpool effect, though one that defied normal hydrodynamics. Instead of pulling the ship downward into a vortex, the rotation seemed to hold it in place, suspended above the rising mass below. Crew members can be heard in the background of Valdez's recording, their voices mixing urgency with disbelief as they reported complete failure of GPS navigation, magnetic compasses spinning uselessly, and communication systems degrading into static despite clear skies and calm weather conditions. The video footage from 21:45 hours shows crew members gathered on the forward deck, pointing downward at the water. Even through the limitations of the camera, the ocean appears wrong, the color shifting from deep blue to something darker, almost black, with that persistent spiral motion creating geometric patterns that seem too precise to be natural. But it's what the instruments recorded during this period that transforms the incident from mysterious to genuinely terrifying. The electromagnetic sensors registered field strengths that multiple physicists have stated flatly should not be possible without technology far exceeding current human capabilities. The readings suggested the presence of precisely controlled electromagnetic fields operating in coordinated patterns, modulating at frequencies that would require computational power and energy sources that exist only in theoretical physics papers. At 2200 hours, the depth finders registered the rising mass at 800 meters below the surface and still ascending. Dr. Valdez's final official log entry was recorded at this time. Her voice, no longer maintaining scientific detachment, described the mass as solid and uniform across its entire diameter, showing none of the irregular topography that would characterize any known geological formation. The sonar returns displayed a surface that was, in her words, artificially smooth, like manufactured hull plating, but on a scale that makes no sense. She ordered the crew to don life vests and prepare the emergency rafts, though her tone suggested she understood the futility of the gesture. The final 18 minutes of video footage have been analyzed frame by intelligence agencies from 6 different nations. At 22:07 hours, the water around the ship began to emit light, a bioluminescent glow that started as scattered points and rapidly intensified into sheets of pale green luminescence. This phenomenon alone might be explained by disturbance of bioluminescent plankton, but the light moved in waves that radiated outward from directly beneath the ship with metronomic precision. The crew members visible in the footage have abandoned any pretense of calm, some pointing at the water, others at instruments, several making gestures toward the sky as if calling for help that everyone knew would not arrive in time. At 22:14 hours, the cameras captured what witnesses in the footage were seeing. The water directly ahead of the ship's bow began to bulge upward, displaced by something massive rising from below. The curvature of the displacement suggested an object of extraordinary size, and as it neared the surface, the water's appearance changed, becoming almost glass-like, reflecting the ship's lights in ways that created disorienting mirror effects. Crew members' voices, captured clearly on the audio, mixed prayers in multiple languages with expressions of awe and terror. One voice, later identified as belonging to marine biologist Dr. Chen Wei, can be heard saying, "It's not stopping. It's going to surface. Oh God, it's going to surface." Yee. And defy. The electromagnetic readings during these final minutes spiked to levels that actually damaged some of the sensors. The data that survived shows field patterns that several analysts have compared to radar or scanning technology, as if the ship itself was being examined by systems of impossible sophistication. The hydrophone arrays captured sounds that acoustic specialists describe as similar to active sonar, but operating across frequencies and with complexity that suggests purposes far beyond simple echolocation. At 22:19 hours, every camera on the Mariana's Eye failed simultaneously. The hydrophones continued recording for another 3 minutes, capturing sounds that remain classified by mutual agreement of the governments involved in the investigation. What is known is that the final audio includes human voices raised in what might be screaming or shouting, though the sounds are distorted by interference that makes individual words impossible to distinguish. The last clear sound captured before all sensors ceased transmission was described in the official report as a tonal pulse of extremely low frequency that created harmonic effects inconsistent with known acoustic phenomena. The international search and rescue operation that followed stands as one of the most extensive in maritime history. The United States Coast Guard, assisted by naval vessels from 6 nations, converged on the Mariana's Eye's last known position within 12 hours of the disappearance. What they found was nothing. The ocean's surface showed no debris field, no oil slick, no life rafts or flotation devices, and no bodies. Deep-sea sonar surveys of the area revealed the abyssal plain at its normal depth of 6,000 meters, showing no evidence of recent geological activity, no scarring from impact, and certainly no 3-mile-wide solid mass. It was as if the ship and everyone aboard had simply been erased from existence, leaving behind only the data stored in remote buoys that had faithfully recorded their final hours. But the story doesn't end with the official search and rescue operation. 6 months after the disappearance, a whistleblower from within the National Reconnaissance Office leaked classified satellite footage that had been deliberately withheld from the public investigation. The infrared satellite imagery, time-stamped at 22:21 hours on March 27th, shows the heat signature of the Mariana's Eye as a bright spot against the cool ocean surface. For 3 seconds, nothing changes. Then a burst of energy blooms at the ship's coordinates, an infrared flash that saturates the satellite sensors. The energy emission lasts for less than 2 seconds, but analysis suggests it represented a release of thermal and electromagnetic energy equivalent to a small tactical nuclear device. When the sensor saturation clears, the heat signature of the ship is gone, vanished mid-frame, replaced by ocean surface temperatures that show no residual heating whatsoever. Whatever happened in those 2 seconds did not simply destroy the ship. It removed it so completely that not even residual heat remained in the water where a 240-foot steel vessel had floated moments before. The leaked footage triggered demands for answers that governments have largely deflected. Official statements characterize the energy emission as a sensor artifact or data corruption, but independent analysis of the satellite telemetry has found no evidence of malfunction. The footage remains a brief but undeniable record of something that suggests technology or natural forces far beyond our current understanding. Today, the waters where the Mariana's Eye vanished appear on maritime charts with the simple notation "Unexplained Vessel Loss, 2023. Research vessels still transit the area, but none have deployed the kind of comprehensive sensor arrays that Dr. Valdez's expedition carried into those waters. The families of the 47 people who vanished continue to seek answers that may not exist within the boundaries of conventional science. And somewhere in classified databases, the final hours of recordings wait, containing sounds and images that suggest we share this planet with phenomena that remain utterly beyond our comprehension, rising from depths we cannot fathom, for purposes we cannot imagine. We've traveled deep into one of the world's most persistent mysteries, examining vanished ships and aircraft, analyzing witness testimony, reviewing official reports and radar records. We've listened to the stories of survivors and studied the data collected by modern instruments. And now, as we reach the end of this investigation, we must confront an uncomfortable truth. We have more questions than when we began. The pattern that emerges from decades of incidents isn't random noise or coincidence. The electromagnetic anomalies appear too frequently, documented by too many independent instruments, across too many years to dismiss. Pilots and sailors from different decades, different backgrounds, different vessels, describe the same geometric patterns of light beneath the waves. They report identical instrument failures, the same eerie green illumination rising from depths that should hold only darkness. When modern research vessels deploy their sophisticated equipment into these waters, they record readings that violate known physics. Compasses spinning without magnetic interference nearby. Electronic systems failing in ways that engineering teams cannot replicate in laboratory conditions. Time discrepancies between atomic clocks and GPS satellites that should be impossible. What makes these accounts particularly disturbing is their consistency. A commercial pilot in 1974 describes underwater lights arranged in precise geometric patterns. A cargo ship captain in 2009 reports identical formations. A private yacht crew in 2017 captures video footage showing the same configuration. These witnesses never met, never compared notes, yet their descriptions align with uncanny precision. The lights don't drift or scatter like bioluminescence. They maintain rigid geometric arrangements, perfect grids and triangles that hold formation at depth, then vanish as if controlled by purpose rather than chance. The physical evidence compounds the mystery. Wreckage that disappears between sonar passes. Debris fields that scatter in patterns inconsistent with known ocean currents. Aircraft parts recovered miles from any possible crash trajectory. And most troubling, the complete disappearances where no debris surfaces at all, where vessels simply transition from radio contact to absolute silence, leaving nothing behind but unanswered transmissions and empty ocean. Here's what we can document with certainty. Maritime insurance companies, those careful calculators of risk who stake their profits on accurate probability assessment, have quietly created a new category specifically for Bermuda Triangle crossings. They don't advertise this classification. They don't issue press releases explaining their actuarial reasoning. But the category exists in their internal documents, carrying premium adjustments that reflect elevated risk. These are institutions that analyze data without emotion or superstition. They deal in statistics and verifiable patterns, and their assessment indicates that something measurably different occurs in these waters. Military shipping routes tell a similar story. Navigation charts used by naval vessels show subtle adjustments, course corrections that route ships around certain coordinates without official explanation. Former Navy personnel, speaking carefully to avoid classified disclosure violations, confirm that specific areas receive informal designation as places to avoid when practical. Not forbidden zones marked by official regulation, but coordinates that experienced commanders route around when alternative paths exist. The military doesn't explain these preferences publicly. They don't acknowledge any unusual threat. But the pattern persists across different commands, different time periods, different naval branches. Statistical analysis reveals perhaps the most disturbing pattern of all. Disappearances and significant equipment failures in the Triangle aren't declining as technology improves. They're increasing. Modern vessels equipped with redundant communication systems, satellite tracking, emergency beacons designed to survive catastrophic damage. These advanced craft experience incidents at rates that should be impossible. A wooden sailing ship in 1945 had limited options when systems failed. But a modern aircraft with multiple backup systems, satellite links, automated distress signals, shouldn't be able to vanish without triggering any emergency protocol. Yet it happens. And it happens more frequently now than it did when technology was more primitive. Consider the implications. Every advance in navigation technology, every improvement in emergency communication, Every redundancy built into modern vessels should decrease incident rates. More ways to call for help means higher survival rate. Better instruments mean fewer navigational errors. Stronger materials mean improved survivability in severe weather. The statistical curve should trend downward, showing technology conquering uncertainty. Instead, the data shows the opposite. As our tools improve, the triangle appears to adapt, to resist, to maintain its record of impossible disappearances, regardless of the sophistication arrayed against it. Scientists examining this phenomenon struggle to propose mechanisms that fit observed evidence. Methane eruptions from the seafloor can sink ships, but they don't explain aircraft disappearing at altitude or the geometric light patterns witnesses describe. Electromagnetic anomalies might disrupt instruments, but documented cases show failures beyond mere compass deviation. Time distortions reported by survivors, where journeys take hours less than should be physically possible, lack any conventional scientific framework. Weather phenomena can certainly prove deadly, but meteorological records don't show unusual storm activity during many disappearances. The vessels simply vanish during conditions that should pose minimal threat. What resists explanation most forcefully is the completeness of some disappearances. Modern aircraft carry multiple emergency beacons, devices designed to automatically activate upon impact with water, transmitting location data via satellite. These systems are nearly foolproof, requiring almost no functional aircraft systems to operate. Yet planes vanish in the triangle without triggering these beacons. Ships equipped with similar technology disappear just as completely. It's as if whatever phenomenon operates in these waters doesn't simply damage vessels, but removes them so thoroughly that even automatic systems designed to survive destruction fail to function. The underwater topography of the region presents additional mysteries. Deep trenches plunge to depths that resist exploration even with modern submersibles. Underwater cave systems extend through limestone formations in configurations that remain largely unmapped. Some researchers propose that unusual geology might generate the reported electromagnetic effects, perhaps through piezoelectric effects in stressed rock formations or unexpected mineral deposits creating magnetic anomalies. But these theories struggle to explain the temporal patterns, why incidents cluster at certain times rather than occurring randomly. They don't address the intelligence that witnesses attribute to the lights they observe, the purposeful geometric arrangements that suggest design rather than geological accident. Local populations in nearby islands maintain traditions that predate modern disappearances by centuries. They speak of areas where the ocean behaves strangely, where experienced fishermen refuse to venture regardless of how promising the catch might be. These oral histories describe lights beneath the waves, sudden storms that appear without warning, boats that vanished leaving no wreckage despite calm seas. Skeptics dismiss these accounts as superstition, but the consistency across generations suggests persistent observation of genuine phenomena, whatever its cause might be. We must acknowledge the limitations of our investigation. With all the data examined, all the expert testimony reviewed, all the scientific analysis conducted, we cannot provide a definitive explanation. The Bermuda Triangle isn't simply unexplained. It appears to actively resist explanation. Each technological advance that should illuminate the mystery instead reveals new layers of impossibility. Each improvement in instruments capable of documenting conditions in the region produces readings that violate established scientific understanding. This isn't a satisfying conclusion. We want answers, clear causation, mechanisms we can understand and predict. Instead, we're left with patterns that suggest intelligence without proving it, with physical evidence that defies conventional physics, with statistical anomalies that shouldn't persist in an age of satellite surveillance and instantaneous global communication. And here's the haunting reality that we must confront. Even as this documentary reaches viewers, dozens of ships and aircraft are crossing those waters. Commercial flights trace paths directly over the most active zones. Cargo vessels transit shipping lanes that pass through coordinates where others have vanished. Pleasure craft venture into the region, carrying families on vacation, sailors pursuing adventure, researchers seeking answers. These crews board their vessels equipped with confidence in modern technology, trusting that GPS and satellite phones and emergency beacons will protect them from whatever claimed earlier victims. They cruise above depths that have swallowed ships whole. They fly over waters that glow with unexplained light. They pass through electromagnetic zones where instruments spin wildly despite no apparent cause. Most will complete their journeys without incident, their crossing unremarkable and safe. But statistical patterns suggest that some, an unpredictable few, will encounter something else. Something that modern science cannot yet explain or predict. Something capable of making vessels vanish as completely as ancient wooden ships disappeared, leaving behind only silence and impossible questions. The ocean beneath them holds secrets that resist our most sophisticated investigation. And we still don't know what waits in those depths, patient and inexplicable, defying understanding while claiming victims with apparent randomness. The Bermuda Triangle remains unsolved, not for lack of investigation, but because the evidence itself points toward explanations that challenge everything we think we understand about the physical world. That's where this journey ends for tonight. If you made it all the way here, subscribe and hit the bell for more long-form stories like this. Check out the videos on screen for more right now. Drop your own experiences in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.